The outstanding engineered phenomena of the alignment of the sun at sunrise to the sanctuary of the temple in ancient Egypt is connected with the name of the great pharaoh Ramesses II, the owner of the two temples of Abu Simbel in Upper Egypt. Ramesses II is one of the greatest kings of the ancient world and the greatest king of ancient Egypt. He had achieved in the fields of construction and military what no other king dreamed of achieving, and he reached the level of fame that made his name mentioned whenever the ancient Egyptian civilization is mentioned. His mummy was welcomed in Paris with the greetings of 21 cannons like any living king, and his name was given to the main squares and streets of Cairo. He is one of the rare kings who ruled a long time that reached 67 years, and he is the father of the biggest number of children, almost 52 boys and 32 girls. He is the owner of the grandest man-made statue anywhere, anytime, which fell down after an earthquake. It weighs 1,000 tons, and it still lies in its place in the Ramesseum Temple. Talking about temples, Ramesses II is the owner of the biggest number of temples in Upper Egypt and the biggest cutout temple in Abu Simbel, that's famous for its miraculous construction and the alignment of the sun that stands witness to the brilliant Egyptian mind and its geniosity in all sciences that he invented, like the science of astronomy and the science of engineering. The ancient Egyptian engineer had used his astronomical knowledge and subjugated it to serve his creeds and its constructional needs. The most impressive and formidable example of that are the great temples of the New Kingdom. Amongst them, only one stands as a prominent and dominant construction. This shows the perfection of engineering and the geniosity of the ancient Egyptian architect. It's the great temple of Abu Simbel. King Ramesses II, the builder of Abu Simbel temples, is the most famous pharaoh of the 19th dynasty kings. He ruled Egypt after the death of his father Seti I for 67 years. That was between year 1305 and 1237 BC. In a text on the walls of Seti I's temple in Abydos, he mentioned that his son was co-regent with him during the latest period of his 14 years of ruling Egypt. King Ramesses II has immortalized himself by building temples and chapels and stelae all over Egypt, the most important of which is the great temple of Abu Simbel, which he dedicated to the cult of Amun and Rahul Akhti and Betah and himself. Next to it is a small temple of Abu Simbel known as Queen Nefertari's temple, dedicated to herself and to goddess Hathor. The great temple of Abu Simbel is a unique prototype of its kind in the art of the human architecture. In fact, Ramesses II has distinguished the area of Abu Simbel over other areas where he had built his other temples, for it was considered one of the holiest places 5 centuries before he thought of achieving this great project. The goddess of the western hills, or Apshik, goddess Hathor, was the source of the sanctity of this place. Ramses II Great Temple came to add more overwhelming feeling of greatness and holiness to this area, for its location was carefully chosen to stand by the Nile on the west bank, rising 124 meters above sea level. The two temples were completely hewn out of the solid rock. Its massive height, that reaches 33 meters, dazzles the viewer with the artistic consistency between itself and the rest of its constructional elements, as well as the incredible harmony between the monument and the mountainous environment which surrounds it. Abu Simbel Temple is composed of a facade occupied by 4 colossal statues of Ramses II, each 20 meters high, and represents him throughout the 4 phases of his life. Then, a great colonnade with giant pillars and statues of the pharaoh is situated directly behind the facade. The hall has side chambers and opens to another hall with reliefs all around the walls. At the depth of 63 meters lies the most important part of the temple and the cause of its famosity worldwide, both in the ancient times and the modern ones. It's the miraculous sanctuary. In the sanctuary, there are 4 statues. The first one on the left represents God Ptah, the god of literature and art. The second statue is of God Amun. The third statue is King Ramses II in his divine nature. And the fourth one to the right is God Ra-Hur-Akhti. The axis of the temple was aligned from west to east in such a way that twice a year the rays of the rising sun reach the divine figures on the rear wall of the sanctuary. On the 22nd of October and the 22nd of February at dawn, the viewers hold their breath, waiting for that glorious moment when the sun bashfully rises in the sky bit by bit, steadily, focusing its rays onto the depths of the temple and on its rarest part and its most sacred one, the sanctuary. The sun then travels slowly and shines over the 4 faces seated there, one after another from right to left, starting with the sun god Ra-Hur-Akhti and ending by Ptah, the god of art and darkness, resting on the way on god Amun-Ra and King Ramses II faces. That miraculous view is one of the most important living proofs to the geniusity of the ancient Egyptians in astronomy and mathematics, and subjugated them to serve their engineering purposes. When the construction of the high dam started in 1960, the water level behind it was expected to rise over 133 meters above sea level. The great temple of Abu Simbel was just 124 meters higher, and the small one 120 meters only. Submerging under the Nile water was inevitable. In 1964, the UNESCO began a rescue mission that seemed impossible. Its plan was dismantling the stones of the temples in the most accurate way and reconstructing them in a new higher location. The challenge was the preservation not only of the natural rock-cut image of both temples, but also of the miraculous engineering phenomena of the sun alignment over the statues inside the sanctuary of the Great Temple that happens only twice a year, in the 20th of February and 20th of October. The new location of the temples was chosen 65 meters higher and directed 180 degrees northwest of the original location. That difference shifted the days to 2 days later. This massive work ended in just 4 years in 1968 and costed 16 million Egyptian pounds, of which Egypt paid the third, the United States the third, and 50 European countries the last third. Just like all pharaohs, King Ramses II wanted to commemorate his name with the gods, and indeed, by his great constructional achievements, presented best in Abu Simbel temples, he'll be remembered with glory forever. Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, called by the ancient Egyptians Djeser Djeseru, or Sacred of the Sacreds, is recognized as one of the architectural wonders of the world. Designed by Senenmut, the temple was constructed around 1450 BC. It is set against the backdrop of the Theban cliffs and rises in a series of 3 layers. In the center of the upper level, there is a doorway entrance that leads into an open court. Opposite the doorway, and cut into the bedrock, is a sanctuary chapel dedicated to the god Ammon. The width of the open court is just under 23.5 meters, with the chapel extending a further 19 meters into the rock. When standing at the rear of the innermost chapel, facing the entrance, there is a clear aperture lens view to the horizon. Hatshepsut's temple is ideally placed to view astronomical events towards the eastern horizon, which includes moon and sunrise, as well as the Orion constellation and the star Sirius. The alignment of the temple is set on an azimuth of 116.5 degrees, which when first discovered suggested a midwinter sunrise alignment. While such events can be postulated in theory, they can only really be proved by being tested out on site at the relevant day of the year. On the day of the solstice, a band of low cloud could be seen close to the horizon, which made it very difficult to make out the horizon even with binoculars. Calculations had suggested that the sunrise would occur at 6:32. In fact, the first rays of the morning sun were not visible until 6:33, when the sunrise was perceived very close to the meridian line of the chapel. However, it's still not possible to determine whether these views showed the sun breaking the horizon or cloud line. The orb of the sun occupies about half of the ecliptic at the horizon, its light in effect occupying a quarter of the visible doorway entrance. The first rays of light from the sun dramatically projected a reddish-pink rectangle onto the rear wall of the chapel. As the sun rose, the projected rectangular light image from the entrance doorway slowly moved to the right before finally moving off the rear wall about 11 minutes after its first appearance. We can now be sure that this same event has occurred annually for the past 3,500 years and will continue to do so in the future. The photographic evidence obtained from the visit to Hatshepsut's temple on the 22nd of December 2007 and again on the 21st of December 2008 affirms this midwinter solstitial alignment of this temple. It adds considerable weight to the view that celestial phenomena played a significant part in determining the alignment of some of the temples of Egypt. About 1.5 kilometers south of Hatshepsut's temple lie the scattered remains of the temple of King Amunhotep III, who reigned from 1382 till 1350 BC. Little now is left of this once great temple, saving two famous statues of the king, known as the Colossi of Memnon, that look out towards the morning midwinter sun at its eastern end. Its orientation, however, can be easily established both through the statues and from a road that abuts the temple and runs straight for 3.5 kilometers to the bank of the Nile. The calculated azimuth of the temple is 116 degrees to 25 degrees against a study of 117 degrees, making this another midwinter sunrise alignment in Luxor area. The main directional orientation of the vast temple of Amun, known as Karnak, which stands on the east bank of the Nile in Luxor, faces west toward the Theban hill on the opposite side of the river. Its calculated azimuth of 296 degrees to 53 degrees corresponds with a midsummer sunset on a level horizon. Magnificent solstitial sunrises can be experienced today from the position of the alabaster altar in the outer courtyard close to the entrance of the present temple, behind the present bark shrine of Amun. However, unlike almost every other temple in Egypt, the present sanctuary of Amun has two doorways, a main door that faces out to central aisle of the temple, and a secondary rear doorway opposite the first, facing east towards the morning sun. One might speculate that at special moments, such as the midwinter sunrise, both doors could have been opened to allow dazzling sunlight to flood the aisle from behind the golden statue of Amun. Such an effect would have been awesome. The ancient Egyptians were the pioneers of science in general, and in astronomy and engineering in particular. However, their knowledge was transferred to the world through the Greeks than the Romans. Ramses II had learned a lot from his predecessors or his father King Seti I, and followed his diplomatic method in dealing with internal and external affairs, and realized his responsibility in achieving stability for the country and maintaining its control over all the lands of the kingdom. Thus, Ramses II deserved to be called the mighty king, and the one whose sun never sets over his personal empire.